a house thing. It's a house thing. It's a house thing.
Hello, I'm Heather Hilda Darling on Let's Talk Property. The show is sponsored by Callaway's Estate Agents, and we're on Radio Reverb 97.2 FM and DAB. Now, I'm really excited about today's show because I'm talking to a young man who seems to have a great job that lots of boys would love to do, or even grown people playing around with drones. And obviously, I have a son of my own, mid-30s, and he started his drone life several years ago when he was filming water sports and loved it. And I used to think, what's all this about? You know, a little machine going up in the air, and suddenly the machine's got bigger and bigger. And then when I was having my extension built a couple of years ago, I said to him, Neil, you couldn't just send your drone through the construction, could you? So I can have a look from an aerial perspective. And that's what he did. So I think today is going to be fascinating. So I have with me in the studio today, Alex O'Connor of Sussex Drone Surveys. So I suppose, Alex, this is a come fly with me welcome.
I guess so.
It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Obviously, I'd like to hear a little bit about your background. Sussex Drone Surveys, that sort of tells me that you're active in Sussex, that you do something with drones, and that something is surveys. So let's start with just hearing a little bit about your background.
So, Alex O'Connor, Sussex Drone Surveys. My background is primarily in leasehold block management. So I started my career in Nottingham about 12 years ago, and sort of started looking after essentially sort of blocks of flats and the communal areas around them. I've been in that 12 years, and managed to sort of work my way through the ranks, and sort of most recently have been managing a large portfolio, a team of people on a national portfolio, and recently sort of set up the drone survey aspect or business. Left that old sort of career and decided to go out on my own and make a bit of a leap and jump into something new, really.
Was that scary?
Yes, very scary. Obviously sort of 12 years of sort of, I suppose, structure mainly structure and a monthly income and a young family. And then just to sort of say, do you know what, I think there might be a little bit more to this. I think I'm getting to the age where I want to do something. I don't want to be sort of too old, and I feel like I'm old enough and just jump into something a little bit different. But yeah, it is pretty scary. It's very new and a steep learning curve.
And any hiccups so far that you would never have expected?
Not so far. I've only really been doing it for probably about sort of 3 months. So not too long, but I think it's just sort of what I found recently is just trying to deal with all the different aspects, whether it's setting up a company on company's house, and then, a business bank account. It's all those sort of like little kind of admin stuff that there's lots of YouTube videos and things to sort of help you and tell you how to do it, but you're never really sure when you're just sort of do it. I suppose what's the worst that can happen, really. But yeah, it hasn't. It's been good. It's just sort of quite a steep learning curve. That's all.
So this is actually post-lockdown. You didn't set up pre-lockdown with your business?
No, I didn't. So sort of the drone side of things kind of came about with I had the leasehold block management and a sort of a career and everything. And the drone side of it used to be a hobby. And it kind of started sort of about 5 years ago where I got my first drone. Enjoyed doing it and kind of flying it around the beach and making sort of pretty videos and sort of chasing the kids around and getting kind of cool videos in slow motion of them kind of, running along the beach and stuff like that. And then it just sort of within the job, it started to become more and more prominent and helpful as exactly the way you found that sort of, well, would you mind just sort of throwing that up there and having a look and sort of seeing what's up there? And obviously within a sort of a business, you can, I don't know, look out for what contractors are doing or sort of make sure they're doing the right thing or tell them to do the right thing. And you've got a bird's eye view and a close up view of something you would never really have from any other way, really. So that interest, where those two sort of things met, really, the interest in drones and then the sort of the work. And yeah, during lockdown, I think that's when sort of a lot of things changed in terms of sort of mindset. I think I'm probably not alone here in that people kind of realize that sort of maybe there's a little bit more to things. And I hear lots of stories that people have just sort of said, do you know what, I'm done with that life. I want to do something else. And I think all that home life and changes, and it spurred people on to jump into things. And to be honest with you, I'm exactly the same, really.
So are you still in that sort of excited phase where you're still not sure what's going to happen? And obviously, you've been in property. Why did you choose property to start with?
To be honest, that was a complete accident. I left university, as I think many careers are. You just kind of just sort of fall into something, really. Yeah. I left university with a marketing degree, and went into a role that really didn't suit. I found myself sort of without anything one day, and sort of went and got a temporary role in a very small managing agents firm, property sort of lettings agents firm. And I did basically sort of 1 week of debt collecting, where I just had to phone people up and try and get money out of them. Simple as that, really. And that was all I had to do. And they just said, right, 1 week, just come in and just whatever you can do, just try and take payments over the phone, get as much money in as you can. But after a week, they said, oh, you're quite good at this. Do you want to stay a month? And then it sort of turned to kind of 6 months. And then it was sort of, a little bit longer. And it sort of turned quite quickly to, you seem to be able to do that. Do you want to look after these properties? We'll show you how. It just kind of carried on from there, really. So yeah, complete sort of accident. Just fell into something and just sort of stuck around and enjoyed it and enjoyed the challenge and carried on with it for sort of 12 or so years.
But do you not think if you've got a marketing background, you understand lots of different nuances, whether it's the looking after the clients or making sure that the products are right, and obviously setting up your own business now, you're going to be reliant on those skills to get yourself out and about, are you not?
I am, and if I'm honest with you, the hardest thing I've found is the kind of marketing side. My degree was sort of 13, 14 years ago, and obviously sort of lots had changed. When I was doing my degree, it's kind of like Facebook had only just really sort of set up, and everything's kind of changed, and the principle is still the same. But if I'm honest, the bit I find most difficult about what I'm doing now is where I pitch things, who I put them to, who I market them to. And when you're, I suppose, 2 or 3 months in, you are looking at every single bit of money you spend. So when someone sort of says, oh, it's just £200 to put this advert in this little local newspaper or something, it's like, well, £250, that's actually it's a micro business on, one person, and that you have to really think about and consider what is my best way to get to the right people, not the most amount of people, the right people, and get sort of in with them. So yeah, that's the bit I've really struggled most with, regardless of my degree, really.
I think we all learn as we go along. I did my degree over 30 years ago, and I can assure you marketing was probably a whole lot different than what you did just 12 years ago. So I'm sure we could contrast and compare in many different ways. But I had to laugh the other day because I had an email saying 2 words you should never use in marketing. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Took a quick peek. You should never use target audience. And I thought, well, there you go, 30 years of, learning about target audiences. And we really have to sweep that away now. Anyway.
97.2 FM, Radio Reverb.
Instant attraction, property and boys' toys. Was it an instant attraction with drones?
Oh, 100%.
Had you played
yeah.
Yeah?
No, the drones it was literally kind of 5 years ago. A company bought out a drone that was small. It was compact. You could fold it away, and it had all of this sort of kit on it that, you know, it had sensors on it. It could tell you exactly where it was. If you flew it towards trees, it would sense those trees and basically sort of stop itself. And it was kind of one of the first real, I'd say low level, but it was still sort of over £1,000, but real low sort of level entry kind of, wow, this is a good bit of kit, and it's for sort of, you know, YouTube people using it, and it's just so quick and easy just to sort of almost take out of your pocket and use. And I can't remember what happened. I got like a tax rebate or something. I got a sort of a tiny little bit of money, and I sort of convinced my wife that it would be a good idea for me to spend 1,300 quid on this drone, just because look at it. It's got sensors. It's amazing. It can fly around in circles and sort of do all this stuff. And somehow I managed to convince her that it was a good idea. And that was it, really, and just kind of took it everywhere. And we went to other countries and sort of, you know, you'd fly it around kind of Italy and big mountaintop kind of towns and stuff like that, and get some amazing views. And probably a lot of places I probably shouldn't have flown it. But, you know, it was just so interesting to sort of see that and how high you could get up and kind of look at all these sort of different things. So, yeah, 100% the boys' toys. And it was just sort of great. And it was after sort of, I suppose, sort of 3 years of messing around with it. It was a little bit more a case of, I think I might be able to make just a little bit of a side hustle. It's just a little bit extra money. I could go off and sort of do this course, make sure I'm appropriately sort of qualified, and make a little bit of side money. And then that side money turned into, well, maybe I could actually just focus on that. And that's it, really.
I think this is it. You know, very often in business, you talk about, you know, focus or differentiation. And if you've got the skills with, you know, your property background, just spending £1,000 on a drone when you compare to probably how much you spend putting up scaffolding to get somebody to go and look at a roof, the labour involved, the getting the parking permits to allow the right vehicles to come and sit where they need to sit. £1,000 really is not a lot, especially if you're using it over and over again. Now, obviously, I appreciate that drones can crash as well, and you have to have spare parts, and you have to, you know, perhaps do some soldering, etc. But in general terms, it must be a bit of a money saving.
I mean, yeah, this is it. This is sort of, you know, you've got to look at sort of all the reasonable aspects of the health and safety side and sort of the limitations. And drones, you know, they're not perfect. And one of the ones I'm flying at the moment is very, very small, and very, very, it can be sort of taken by the wind. So it's not perfect. But when you sort of compare it to, it's like another tool in an arsenal, I guess. It's sort of which one is appropriate to you. Scaffolding or cherry pickers, as you say, sort of, you know, there's loads of different issues with cherry pickers, and you have to normally employ someone else to come and do it, you know, and you have to have two people there at all times. And if there's steps or something, you might not be able to get, or grass, and the thing sinks, and sort of, you know, there's loads of other sort of reasons why this can be better. So yeah, there isn't that much ongoing cost with them, as long as you sort of maintain them and you look after them and you don't do anything sort of silly, you don't get too close to anyone. But it has been helpful on a lot of cases. The leasehold management has a certain bit of legislation within the Landlord and Tenant Act that sort of tries to stop rogue landlords or managing agents from charging leaseholders too much money. And on small buildings, that level is quite restrictive. So to get a scaffold or a cherry picker, it might actually sort of go over that level, which requires pretty much a sort of a 3-month process of due diligence to prove that you are going out of your way to make sure that you're doing things in the best interests. Of asking someone to put some scaffolding up and going to have a look, you might have to go through that process. And if there's a leak, it's really difficult to sort of say, well, we've got to go through this process now and it's going to take 3 months. Well, if there's water coming into someone's property, so if someone's got water coming through their roof and you sort of go and tell them that there might be a 3-month legislative process to sort of go and get it sorted, that doesn't help anyone. So it's a good start is to sort of get the drone in the air for a reasonable cost to everyone involved, just to have a look, sort of see what you're working with. And then if you see, for example, it's a slip tile or something, you can go back to a contractor and confidently sort of say, look, this is the problem. I've got decent photos. Give me a quote sort of based on that. And then you're maximizing whether it's the scaffold, they might only have to put it up once, or sort of, just the best use of time really. And so what's going on. I think a lot of people are cynical and skeptical about some contractors, and you have to sort of know who you're dealing with and trust them. And without any sort of sight at all of something, there is that little bit of, well, do I trust these people? Maybe they're saying it's 5 tiles have slipped when it's only 1 or something like that. It's but with that, you've got more information to hand to be able to carry out the right thing, really.
I mean, that sounds like a really good reason to use a drone. I mean, do you have issues with the height of buildings in Brighton and Hove, for example? Because we do have some seriously high buildings, don't we? And obviously a lot of the converted buildings as well. Did they give you any particular issues?
No, the drones that I use, to be honest with you, their range is absolutely fantastic. So much so that you can, one of them I can travel about 3 kilometers if I wanted to. That's the range. The battery life is about 30 minutes. And it can go 30 odd mile an hour. So you can, there's people on the internet that sort of, you can carry on going up as far as it will go. There's a lot of legislation in place though. And, so the size of the buildings is not anywhere near an issue really.
Do you have to wear that funny visor to see where your drone's going?
No, I don't. I use that's a first person view. That's a little bit more kind of technical. I have a little remote control, and then I put basically a phone or an iPad on it, so I can control it, and I can see exactly where it's looking and what it's looking at. Sort of see all the sort of stats and everything about what the drone's doing, how fast it's going, how long the battery is. And then I sort of flip between looking at the drone and looking at the screen, and sort of keep on going sort of backwards and forwards, basically, to make sure everything's safe and everything's sort of in the right place, and I know what's around. But one of the main issues down on the south coast is we get a lot of seagulls, obviously.
Do you know, I was just about to ask you, do you ever have any encounters with our feathered friends at all?
Unfortunately, too many. I think I've had a spate of jobs recently, and it's about 3 or 4, and they've all been pretty much like on the coast, which is obviously where a lot of issues are because of the rain and sort of getting blasted by wind and stuff. But really is, you've got to duck and dive, and the seagulls try and sort of swoop on you and they poo on you, and you have to kind of.
Do you go out with a hard hat on then, Alex? Do you go out with a hard hat on?
And a visor, just a visor and a hard hat, just to make sure that you're going to get. And it's very. You have to kind of maneuver and fly up and down, and sort of almost hide in the sort of wake of the building, and then sort of go up, do what you need to do, then move back down again, and keep on moving around, really. It's not easy.
Okay. So what do you love most about what you're doing now? I mean, you're a new business, obviously, but has something really grabbed you now? You think, I really love that and I'd like to develop that side.
I think for me at the moment, it's the fact that I'm doing something new and doing something kind of interesting. And instead of doing kind of someone, I suppose, paying the 35 hours a week, I'm, technically spending 35 hours a week just focusing on the thing that I want to focus on. It's not someone else paying me for stress and hassle. It's 35 hours a week, and it's like, if I want to do this or that, I can do. And for me at the moment, that's the key thing. I'm just taking that time and having really sort of focusing on what I want to do, and hopefully it'll kind of, come off.
Are you working on commercial and residential properties, Alex?
Yes, I am. Yes. I'm working with a lot of surveyors and managing agents. Again, so that's obviously my background is more sort of focused towards that. But I've helped out a lot of people kind of, sort of the smaller issues and kind of, my chimney. I want to see what's going on with my chimney. So it's more sort of, local on the street. But primarily my focus based on my background is more towards sort of surveying firms and managing agents, because I understand what issues they go through. I know what the things that they will face with leaseholders or resident management company directors, and for budgeting, and how difficult that scenario and those practices are. I'm able to kind of make things a little bit easier for them, hopefully, and sort of say, don't worry, look, I've got this. This is what I can do. This is how it will help. And this is what, this is what can make your life easier. And I think that's all managing agents want, really, is an easy life and just sort of simplicity, and people to do what they say they're going to do and get a good job done. So
in essence, you're speaking the same language as them. Somebody who perhaps has got a drone and says, well, yes, I can fly my drone over and above. They won't necessarily think to ask the right questions, whereas you know which questions to ask, as you said, about budgets and costs and when does the job have to be done by, and making sure that you get all the information you can to pass on to the managing agents.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's really important that it's kind of, you pay for a service overall, and you pay for sort of people's experience and sort of what they know. Drones at the moment, they are a lot more accessible, and anyone can go out and buy them. But you're not just sort of paying for that. If you want one photo or something, then fine. You could find anyone to do that. Much like any industry thing, you'll always find someone to do something kind of at a price you're willing to pay, but it's all of the other stuff that you sort of pay for. So it's the sort of the experience and the what else I can provide is sort of quite important.
Okay. Now I'm going to sound like a school teacher here. Do you remember when you first left school and you decided to go to university? Maybe people were saying to you, now where do you think you'll be in 5 years' time, Alex?
Oh,
if we sat here now and said, where do you think you'll be in 5 years' time? What would you like your business to look like?
I really dislike this question.
I know, they're terrible because life gets in the way, doesn't it?
It is. I think the only sort of reasonable thing and sort of, manifesting it forward is I just hope to be happy, stable and sort of comfortable in kind of what I'm doing, really. And I think as a rounded off, I think it's quite easy to make bold statements of high flying sort of considerations, but I think it's just to be happy and stable and enjoy what I'm doing. And if I can carry on doing that, then that's perfect.
And of course, within 5 years, the technology is going to be getting even more precise, even more accessible, isn't it? So, we don't know what other features that the drones are going to have to enable you to provide an even better service than you're doing already.
Indeed. And the sort of the service that I do provide is not, at the moment, it's not kind of that technical. So you can get mapping programs, you can get thermal imaging and all that sort of stuff. And it's quite sort of high end. And obviously sort of people have to pay for that. And I'm happy to look at that. And again, going back to the 5 year question, I'd love to look at that. But I feel at the moment, it's sort of people want the more accessible. They want the quick fixes, and they want sort of, they don't necessarily need the thermal imaging. They just want to know why there's water coming into their building.
Good point.
It's like I don't know, almost like sort of low level fruit, low hanging fruit. Perhaps it's kind of just you deal with what the sort of the market is and solve the issues, solve the problems. And as I get sort of bigger and hopefully sort of more successful with it, I might look at additional bits to put on the drones, again, thermal imaging, etc., and to be able to branch out. But at the moment, the focus is just sort of helping people kind of get through the day for a reasonable price and a good service.
And actually, that's all a lot of people want, isn't it? You know, you're just providing what people want.
I think so, yeah. Well, I hope so, yeah.
Radio Reverb.
Making music night and day.
97.2 FM.
So just tell me a little bit the ethos of your company. How, you know, we all say, well, how did we get to be where we are? What is it that we want to provide? I mean, you've more or less answered that already, but when you were leaving the sort of the leasehold management part of it, the ethos of what you want to provide, can you give me sort of it in a nutshell?
I suppose taking the experience from leasehold management, I think everything to do with leasehold management is based on fair and reasonable. People get charged things and it has to be fair and reasonable. And if they want, they could take that to a tribunal, a court, and sort of say that it isn't fair and reasonable. So I think that's the main point, is to do a good job, sort out a problem, address an issue, and be fair and reasonable while doing it. And hopefully, you know, I find it interesting and other people find it interesting. They love coming along and they love sort of seeing the drones. And I go to managing agents and I can do sort of little sort of demos, and they ask so many questions, and they just kind of don't appreciate, you know, like how stable they are or kind of how good the camera is and that kind of stuff. And I'd love to show people that. And if they're engaged and if they want to see it, they're so interested. And again, with that, it's just nice to sort of be with people who are interested and like-minded, again, sort of property professionals, and helping them out, because again, I know what their role is and the problems with their role.
I find them quite cute, the tiny drones. It's like having a little sort of budgerigar in your hand sometimes. They're just so cute and quaint. And I look at them and I think, how on earth can you get images like that from a tiny little drone that, as you say, a little bit of wind and it gets whipped away? Yeah. I think they're fascinating. But when you did your course, what sort of things did that take you through to learn how to use drones? To learn how to use drones.
So sort of previously, the legislation has changed recently, but previously you had to abide by the Civil Aviation Authority and a lot of their technical data and technical sort of legislation, which was focused on all different types of aircraft, you know, sort of obviously Boeings, helicopters, and so it's such a wide range. So we carried out 3 days of classroom study about how to read maps, the appropriate air navigation orders, and all sort of the legislation, how to do things safely, down to sort of what would hold you back, what I was, whether you should be drinking before, or what happens if you've had a night out before, or anything like that. Anything that would hamper the flight. And again, that sort of stuff is probably more appropriate if you're responsible for a Cessna or a Boeing or something. But it applied to the drones as well. And in addition to that, I carried out a flight test. So I sort of went into a field and I had to prove that I could control the drone and make sure I could sort of maneuver it safely. And what happens if something goes wrong? So what happens if there's a bird strike, or what happens if a helicopter comes sort of quite close to you, and sort of what you do and all those sort of procedures. And then there was basically a 100-page sort of document that I had to send off. I had to fill out all of these details, write like a risk assessment, like a method statement to sort of say, this is how I intend to act during my sort of day activities. And that was called a PFCO, a permission for a commercial operation. And you had to go through all of these and pay them a considerable amount of money for the training. And then the Civil Aviation Authority basically sort of said, yes, it's appropriate for you to do this. You've proved, and now we'll give you this sort of formal permission. That's from the Civil Aviation Authority. It's not just, it's sort of...
It's not the local council, is it?
Exactly, yeah. It's the people that control, Gatwick and Heathrow. It's sort of everything. And like I said, the legislation has changed recently, and that's allowed things to sort of open up a little bit. And the drone I use primarily at the moment is again very small. But you mentioned about the camera. I suppose because you've got obviously phones that are the drone I've got is about the same size as my phone, and the cameras in those phones are obviously sort of very good. And it's the same. It's the same sort of camera. It's a little bit better, and it flies. So it's.
But it's amazing that they can take video and stills at the same time, isn't it? More or less.
Yeah.
If you had to send a videographer and a photographer up on the roof, here's this little drone, as you say, the size of your mobile phone, able to climb 30, 40, 50 feet, and just take a couple of images for you, and it's back down on the ground before you can say drone images.
Yeah, it is. And again, it does that. It's sort of, if you look at a chimney, you can get a sort of a 360 view of that chimney, sort of just flying around it in a circle, taking photo all the way around. And again, with a scaffold or a cherry picker, they're restrictive. You go up at one point, and that's the point where you want to get to. If you needed to go over the other side of the building, you have to take it down and put it back up. So it's that drone. Yeah, it can just go up and down and sort of wherever you need it to go quickly, efficiently, and safely.
So let's just imagine, Alex, that I've got an issue with, I'm not sure whether it's a roof tile or maybe it's a gutter that's come loose. And I call you in and I say to you, Alex, I want to know what the problem's all about. Just tell me how that would work from start to finish.
So from start to finish, you'd ask me sort of that you want me to come and have a look. I'd ask for sort of the location, a postcode, and essentially I would go onto the internet. I would find out exactly where that postcode was, and in the first instance, I'd do a couple of checks. For example, if the property was in Crawley, I would probably have to go through a lot more risk assessments to make sure I was doing stuff safely because to the proximity of Gatwick Airport. So I have to make sure I know where it is. If it was in perhaps near Lewis, there's a prison there, and they have restricted areas. So I have to look at the specific airspace around that property always, just to make sure it is actually safe and it isn't a no-fly zone, or it isn't in the path of a runway or anything like that, or a local glider club or something. So that's the first point, just to make sure, is this safe for me to fly in this area? Then I would go and check another website called NOTAMs to make sure if there was anything sort of in the area on that day. For example, when you go down to Eastbourne, if there is the red arrows flying past at a certain time, NOTAMs lets you know that, and it sort of says what is in that airspace on that day that I sort of want to go and fly. So assuming all those things are okay, I would give the client a risk assessment and a method statement. So I would sort of say that I've looked at certain things, how I would carry things out, what height I would go to, what happens as of any risk assessment. I assess the risk and make sure, well, is there going to be lots of pigeons and bird flights? Is it sort of right near a school? Will there be privacy issues? Is it near a jail? Will I get in trouble with the police? Is looking at all of those things to make sure I can carry out that inspection safely and not endanger any other property or any other person.
Well, you've already described what presumably isn't just a 5-minute job either. You're having to do your research before you even go on site.
Correct. Yeah. And that's all sort of stuff that how we were taught in the PFCO course is sort of, what would you want to say if you were sort of standing in front of a judge? And that's exactly the same as in leasehold management, is sort of, you do things as if you cover your behind, you cover your back to make sure if something happened and I was standing in front of a judge, I could say that I did A, B, C, D, and I checked X, Y, and Z. And, sometimes some things just happen. So it's important to kind of prepare. That's sort of normally the biggest aspect of it, is to prepare and make sure you're doing the right thing and you can do it safely. So then from there, kind of show up on the day. Sometimes there are restrictions with weather. We've had a couple of storms over the past couple of nights. The drones are very good, but they can be hampered with the wind, and obviously sort of rain. They don't, as with all electricals, they don't particularly like rain. Carry out the images, get photos depending on what the client wants. Take nice sweeping video, high resolution video, or whether it's sort of targeted to a more surveyor's role of, a dilapidation report. So they want to know sort of, specific conditions, and what condition the roof or the mortar or the render is, or, things like that. And getting them sort of exactly what they need and sort of answering their brief. So that's important as well. When you speak to the client, is finding out exactly what they're after. Do they want pretty aesthetic shots, or do they want functional? I did it on one roof, and I took 150 photos of a roof, and it's almost sort of meter by meter, hundreds of photos. And it's sort of, for anyone else, it would just be thoroughly boring of just sort of like tiles. So it obviously sort of depends on what they want. And that's it. And hopefully they're happy, and I get paid for the job.
Job well done. So presumably after all this, you put like a report together, send it off, and then if the client wants additional information, he or she might come back and say, well, I want this extra work done as well. And you would go back and carry that out, presumably, yes?
Yes, again, purely dependent on what they're after and what their sort of specification was and what they were what they needed, really. But
I suppose this is the same as in anything to do with property. The brief is all important, isn't it? I mean, if you say to somebody or a landlord says to us, I want the front of my building painted, that could be interpreted in so many different ways. Do they mean they want the walls painted? Do they want the windowsills painted, the window frames painted, the gutters painted? And I think this is where the devil is always in the detail, to make sure that you get the client brief, although I suppose the brief can go into many, many pages, just to make sure that you're getting exactly what the client wants. And I don't suppose they always know exactly what they want either, because if they're not briefed in property, they don't necessarily know what it is they need to know.
Yeah, and I think it's all to do with, I suppose, where they're coming from and what they're after, how experienced they are. And again, that's where my experience comes in, is sort of, I lead them to that and sort of say, well, look, this is basically what I think I can get you. Again, for example, a surveyor might want something different to a resident management company director. A surveyor wouldn't necessarily want me to draw up a report, sort of say what I've found, because he just wants to see the photos, because he's fantastically qualified to make his own judgment based on those photos. But a resident management company director he's asking me for my professional opinion. So I would do him a report, and I would try and answer and sort of say, look, in my experience, this is where you've got issues. This is what you've got to look at. And again, with leasehold management, there's different parts of buildings that are sort of other people's responsibilities, whether they're the freeholder's responsibility or whether they're the leaseholder's responsibility. So there's always kind of like thankfully, that's not necessarily my problem, unless I'm sort of asked to advise on it. But it's sort of, the roof might be different to who's responsible for painting the windowsills, So yes, it is. It's all in the brief and all exactly sort of I'll give as much information and advice as I sort of think I can, really.
I mean, obviously, this is all fairly new technology, although I think we said earlier, drones have been around since 1935. And, beforehand, they used to be very often used in wars and trying to find enemy, etc. But when you think now of all the reasons for using a drone, research and development, for example, even parcel delivery they've been talking about, locating victims of catastrophes. When you think about, even David Attenborough, I think when we watched his programme on Sunday evening, he must have been using drones to film some of those animals. They were just incredible photos. So when it comes to drones being mainstream in the property industry, how far do you think we are away from that at the moment?
I think most companies are familiar with it in one way or another. My feedback so far with working with a number of surveyors are that they weren't aware of the legislation change that's happened quite recently, and this sort of opens a lot of things up. It loosened the reins a little bit and allowed the smaller drones, which are getting so much better. Again, they can sort of do so much more and in built up areas. But the bigger drones you get, it's sort of, you still are sort of restricted on where you can fly those, and sort of because they're huge, they're absolutely massive. And if they hit a building or, God forbid, a person, they would cause a lot of damage. So I think a lot of people know about them, but perhaps just don't utilize them or don't necessarily understand the benefits that they can provide. So again, from my feedback of sort of being with managing agents, they're like, oh, I don't think we need one. And then when you explain sort of how it can help and what you could sort of do with it, they go, oh yeah, actually that would be really helpful with, budgeting on that block. And there's been a leak up there and we haven't been able to find it. It sort of, lots of people start to kind of, the cogs kind of rotate, and they actually know that might be useful. So it's getting there, and it just sort of takes more time, and you have to use it, and then you sort of see the benefits of it.
I conferred with our furry friend.
Radio Reverb.
If you've just tuned in, I'm Heather Hilda Darling on Let's Talk Property, talking to Alex O'Connor of Sussex Drone Surveys. Now, you can listen again to the programme by going on to my podcast. And obviously, at the end of the programme, I will ask Alex how people can get in touch with him if they're interested in finding out more about his surveying services. But anyway, Alex, it's fascinating, and I've still got lots of questions to ask you. So obviously, you weren't that affected in itself by the lockdown, but presumably during the lockdown, you had time to think about all the different services you could provide with your, one man and a drone, I suppose, really. Is that do you still find that because clients are asking questions, it sends you off on another tangent? Or are you, as you're going along day by day in all the jobs that you do, thinking, there's another specialist service that I can offer?
I think the fact that kind of I'm doing this sort of on my own, and I'm sort of a sole trader and starting up, I think it means that you can pivot, quite quickly and quite easily. And having, I suppose, access and talking to managing agents and surveyors, you're always listening to people, sort of hearing what they're doing, and you're involved in sort of sometimes bigger projects. So you can work quite quickly, think, okay, that's a good idea. I need to, even down to what you say in sort of presentations, always learn from the last presentation. Of if someone asks you a question, well, then you take it into the next presentation and you sort of answer it, or the next people have asked it. So, and I think that's sort of, what I'm finding and what I'm really interested in is sort of, companies, even small companies, they're big, they've got hierarchies. You can't just sort of go in and just start sort of necessarily changing things quite so easily, but having that freedom to be able to do that and learn on your own, and sort of develop it how you want to. And that was really kind of the emphasis for sort of doing this. It was to have a little bit more control, and take the daily life.
So I suppose on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being low and 10 being high,
I think.
What's the learning curve average at the moment?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course I can.
Then. Sorry.
So if we think about the learning curve, you're new to the business. It's a business that you've just set up. You're obviously learning lots and lots on a day-by-day basis. So if 0 was low and 10 was high, where are you on the learning curve at the moment?
Oh, I don't know. I think probably a sort of a 6 or 7. I think I've got some. I managed to get sort of all the websites and sort of setting up emails and sort of servers and how I was going to sort of structure it. That it was difficult and took a long time, but I've had some experience in that before, and I sort of kind of knew what I was doing. But it's even down to sort of when you create a website and you have to write copy and just to fill the website, just to write kind of, 500 words. I found it immensely difficult.
How many times can you use the word drone as a keyword in your content?
Exactly. Yeah. It's sort of, it's kind of, I'm just saying the same thing over. It's like I'm repeating the same sentence over and over again, basically. So that sort of side of things, the bit that I really sort of struggled, I suppose, is kind of setting up kind of actual companies and sort of company's house and whether I'm doing the right thing. And then later down the line, sort of, tax and all of that, I think that's going to be a sort of a steep learning curve bit for me. But at the moment, I feel relatively kind of stable, and it's just constantly sort of saying to myself every day, sort of like, well, it's better than sitting in an office and sort of working for someone else.
No, I agree. And I suppose that's the biggest thing, really, isn't it? When you go from being an employee to becoming self-employed, the changes are so vast, and suddenly you feel that responsibility, not only to yourself, but you've got a young family and, making sure that you're bringing home the bacon every day. It's a huge, huge responsibility.
It is. And there was, it takes a lot of planning to make sure that you're kind of, appropriately sort of, you've got a barrier and you've sort of addressed that risk. What's the worst thing that could happen? How long could you sort of last without that sort of monthly paycheck with mortgages and two young kids, etc. So it was a bit of a jump, and you've got to make sure that all of those aspects, are covered, I guess.
So are you doing a reality check every day of the week?
Every day.
Good for you.
I used to drive for like 3 hours a day. I used to leave home at kind of 7 o'clock in the morning and get home at kind of 6:15, 6:30. And to some people that won't be a really long day, but traveling 40 miles from South Coast up to sort of South London every single day, and dealing with that. And what the lockdown did, I think, was sort of, it gave me a lot of hours back, and it sort of, I started doing other things. I wasn't so grumpy. I didn't sort of, when I used to get home at 6:30 and you have to put the kids to bed instantly, and they're already, they're happy to see you, and they're lively, and they're screaming and shouting and jumping all over you. And really, in cold, in the winter months when it's very dark and you're just sort of driven, all that way every single night, it really was, it can be quite a struggle. And that was sort of again, you look at what you're doing and think, do you know what, if I got those three hours back a day,
it's a lot.
What could I do? And sort of, I started reading more and cooking and all of that kind of stuff, and sort of spending more time with the kids and better time with the kids. And again, that was sort of part of the decision to do that.
So I'd like to ask you now, obviously you've set up your own business. I suppose you're a first generation business. Would you like your children to follow in your footsteps?
I think so. And my dad started up a business a long time ago, and kind of, he's always sort of pushed the ethic of sort of, you don't always need to work for someone else. I felt I kind of needed to. And again, as I said, this is sort of, I think, the right time for me to do it. And everyone's different. But I think if they've got something and they can enjoy it, I think you've got to obviously find a market, though. And whatever that market is, you've got to be able to find something that you can provide a service. and be able to sort of fundamentally, I suppose, make a living, make something out of it. And so, yeah, I would like them to do it. And again, it gives them control, but it'll just be down to them of when is the appropriate time for them to do that. And that might be sooner, or might be kind of years to come. It's, I'm kind of, I don't know, 38. So, I'm kind of, I suppose, midway. I don't think I would have done it sooner. I wouldn't have been ready to do it sooner. But a lot of people I know, and I've worked with a lot of contractors, builders, plumbers, all that kind of stuff, they do it when they're sort of 17, 18, 19. And that's right for them, and it's brilliant.
So just before we start closing, just explain a little bit the emotional distress of running your own business, or are you still in those early stages where it's still lots of fun, lots of learning? You've already alluded to the fact that you are enjoying what you're doing. Would you say that the emotional stress curves go up and down as each day comes and goes, or is it flatter?
At the moment, it's flatter, and I think that's due to sort of preparation, making sure I knew what was coming. Not sort of a worst case scenario, but just sort of being sort of prepared for that. So for me personally, I'm getting a lot done. It's going really well. It could always be better, but there's nothing sort of, I suppose, massively kind of no massive lows for me at the moment. So I'm really pleased. So again, maybe I'm deluding myself, and that is kind of complete honeymoon phase. And the winter is going to give me a bite in the bum. I don't know. But,
you've got to enjoy what you're doing.
Exactly.
You really do.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's my closing bit, Alex. Imagine that tomorrow planned preventative maintenance becomes a government requirement on all commercial and residential properties. To show evidence, a certificate of regulated checks is required to be lodged with a professional body, along with photographs or video, actually, because they're very easy to read. What would your top 3 recommendations be to encourage people like pension funds, landlords, tenants, managing agents to see the sense of such a move, bearing in mind what you're doing at the moment?
Well, I think a lot of that is actually kind of currently sort of happening and going through the motions, isn't it? You get fire safety orders, fire safety bills, and they're sort of really kind of bringing that up to make sure that happens in terms of fire doors for leasehold properties, cladding, etc. And sort of those things are sort of heightening. But I suppose it's never to do the least possible. I think for landlords and pension funds and freeholders and leaseholders and resident management companies, it's very easy to do the sort of the bare minimum to get you through something. And I don't think that should be the case anymore. And I think that's kind of a wholesale across the whole industry, that it shouldn't always be the cheapest. It shouldn't always be the bare minimum just to sort of tick a box. Everything should be considered. There are sort of bits in place about kind of making sure that you have adequate checks on, large staircases and sort of big structures of buildings. And frankly, I don't think that's kind of done enough. And that would also sort of help me out that, if that kind of came into play, then it would provide hopefully suitable sort of business for me. But I think that's the key point, is just to never, just don't do the bare minimum. And I think that especially a leasehold property sector has really sort of struggled with it. A lot of people over the years not necessarily doing as much as they could. And now it's coming back to sort of haunt us. So I think
well, I suppose all the time we're having to show responsibility, accountability, and, obviously all the HHSRS stuff thrown in just for good measure. It makes absolute sense what you're doing now. And I wish you the best of luck with your business. It sounds fascinating. Maybe I'm going to have to get my son to show me how to fly one of these things. But to finish off, Alex, if anybody wants to contact you, where can they find you? Your website, any social media, email addresses? Just throw it all at me now. sussexdronesurveys.co.uk is the website. My email address is just
alex@sussexdronesurveys.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, it's Alex O'Connor, and Instagram of Sussex_drone_surveys. Bit of a mouthful, that one. So I hope kind of people can kind of find it. Yeah. So give me a call, even if you just sort of want to discuss and sort of talk through, even if you're not sure if it would be appropriate. We can just sort of see where you are and what you're needed. And it's just an honest approach to sort of say, I think you're better off with someone else, or yes, I can help you. We can just sort of talk it through.
Alex, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. It's been fabulous listening to, everything that you do. And I really, really wish you the best in your new business. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you. That's really great. Thank you for having me.
Okay, you're welcome. So this is Heather Hilda Darling of Let's Talk Property on Radio Reverb 97.2 FM and DAB. Thank you for joining me.
It's a house thing. It's a house thing.